After almost all hope being lost of us ever seeing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 remastered in the same way that they did 1 and 2, we finally have it. We can finally experience these levels again with the beautiful visuals that we saw in 1+2, albeit with some changes to the games between 2001 and now. But what if I don't have a PS5 or Series X? What if I don't have a PS4 or Xbox One? I guess I can just pick these games up for the PS2 again, and it'll probably be cheaper than buying the new game anyways. Well, what if I don't have a PS2? I only ever had a Game Boy Advance, and I just picked up a PS1 the other day. Well, that's perfect, because Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 have been available for those consoles since the games initially released 20 years ago. Pro Skater 3 was even available on the N64, but it didn't get Pro Skater 4 unfortunately. So, as I discussed in a portion of my cross-gen ports video, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was being released on a ton of consoles with drastically different hardware capabilities. This meant that the games weren't going to look the same. But the thing is, they actually look the same. Kind of. Now take a look at these games. Oh boy, they look the same. But hold up, I've just ran into a wall where there's supposed to be a path. What the hell is even going on here? Alright, so Tony Hawk's Pro Skater started out on the PS1 and had a port for the N64 as well. When Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was released, it came out on the PS1 and the N64 again, but then it also got a version on the Game Boy Advance. Okay, that's interesting. Now by the time that Pro Skater 3 was released in 2001, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox had already released and the PS1 and N64 were considered last gen. This didn't matter though because Activision wanted a huge install base for this series that at this point was probably its biggest moneymaker. So the thing about this franchise though is that, as I said before, it started out on the PlayStation 1, which meant there was an engine from 2 Pro Skater games that already existed that worked on that console. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was the series' first entry on next-gen consoles, and it certainly showed. Skating and doing tricks felt a lot smoother on the PS2 than it did on the previous generation. Levels were packed with a lot more detail and most notably featured NPCs, as well as cars in certain stages. This lent the game to more creative goals that made use of these NPCs. You could also play online with other people for the first time. But probably the best thing they added was the ability to revert. Although the levels in this game were more intricate than in previous entries, and the skating felt smoother, under the hood of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was what made the series great, and that was the fun gameplay that was introduced in the first game. So although the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 didn't have the hardware capabilities of the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube, or Xbox, that didn't mean they couldn't have the next entry in the series. I'm sure to Activision that it was a matter of having the game be available to purchase to as many people as they could if you consider the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Color versions of this game. But I like to think that despite Activision's intentions behind the many versions of Pro Skater 3, when they enlisted Shaba Games to create the PS1 version and Edge of Reality to create the N64 version, they wanted to create an experience that the PS2 players were getting for players who weren't able to afford the next generation of consoles. I'm primarily going to talk about the PS1 version of Pro Skater 3 rather than the N64 version. I'll touch on the N64 version though cause it's pretty weird. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 for the PS1 released the same day that it did for the PS2 on October 30th, 2001 in North America and a month later in Europe. The N64 version, however, would not release until nearly 10 months later on August 20th, 2002. This game has the honor of being the last N64 game released, which also means this console didn't get Pro Skater 4, in case you were wondering. Back to the PS1 version though. You boot up the game and see the same iconic boot screens that are found on the PS2, but then you also see the logo for Shaba Games. The Ace of Spades intro plays and you load into the skate shop. So the cool thing about the menu screens on the PS2 Pro Skater games is they utilize levels as the backdrops to the menus. I'm guessing the same thing happened in this game because in the PS2 version you see the owner of the skate shop walking back and forth, or in Darth Maul's case. On the PS1, however, it's empty. Hello? Is someone working today? Were those the employees I saw smoking out front? Why wouldn't they lock up? In any case, while we're here, we can create a skater. The system in this version of the game isn't as detailed and in-depth as the system on the next generation of consoles. You can customize your character, but there isn't too much you can change on them, but nonetheless, you can create a skater. Which means you can also add stat points. In this game, there's a stat for landing that isn't featured in Pro Skater 3 on the PS2, This must be left over from Pro Skater 2. You can also customize your decks, though not to the same extent as Pro Skater 3. They also have the custom parks. There's a mode for 2 players, but it's grayed out, probably because I don't have 2 controllers connected. Let's select career though. 3 medals to earn and 50 goals instead of 54? That's kinda weird. I wonder what they changed. Let's click on level select and, well, Foundry's first up, but then Los Angeles is the second level? Then everything else is normal, but Canada is the second last level. That's pretty weird that Canada and Los Angeles are flipped in these versions. No cruise ship though. You might think it's a secret level that isn't appearing here on the list, but it's just not in this game at all, unfortunately. Alright, let's load into Foundry and see how the level looks. Okay, so like the previous games, our goals are presented to us during the loading screens, and we don't have goal movies like on the PS2. Also, the set of goals are different. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every level and show every difference between PS1 and PS2, but I will go through some of the ways they made the goals work on the PS1, at least from my observation. I don't know how they made them work on a technical level. Anyways, with the addition of NPCs, goals could take on a lot more variety, like stopping a car chase or helping a thin man. The goals on the PS1 though had to work with the limitations of the hardware. There are no NPCs at all in this game, so goals like that can't happen. These games can still have objects and skate letters and stat points floating around levels though, so here's how they make these goals work. Every level of these games, besides the competition levels, have the high, pro, and 6 scores. They also have the skate goals and secret tapes and decks to collect. On Foundry, for example, on PS2 you have to soak the foreman and grind the molten bucket. But on PS1, no NPCs and less active things are on the map mean no foreman and no movable lava bucket. So to compromise, they have you activate the press by grinding this lever and also grinding the control booth. The molten bucket and foreman goals both involve a grind, so these goals fit, I think. The other goals like cannonball the half pipe and unjam the valves are the same in both versions, though unjamming the valves requires a grind on the PS2. And there's no secret area in the PS1 version of Foundry. Okay, Foundry is a pretty basic first level with fairly simple goals. Let's look at a level in the middle. Suburbia has a good mix of goals. On PS2, the unique goals are heel flip the trailer hop, squash 5 pumpkins, restore power to the dish, and help the thin man. How does the PS1 handle these goals? Well, heel flipping the trailer hop could have appeared, I think, but I'd say the goal they replaced it with was 360 flip the weather vane. Squash 5 pumpkins could have also appeared. I don't know why they chose not to include this goal either, but I think the version of these goals on the PS1 are dissing the dishes and appalling the appliances. So 2 goals instead of 1, and they both have unique assets. I wonder why they didn't do a pumpkin. Okay, restore power to the dish. This goal doesn't have an equivalent on the PS1, and same with helping the thin man. Maybe help the thin man can be compared to ice the ice cream man, as both goals are kind of dark in their own ways. Every level will have its own kind of set of goals that differ between each version. The PS1 versions need to accommodate for the hardware they're on, and to do that they make some changes. But I don't know why they changed certain things like pumpkins to appliances. My only guess is that they already had the stove or dishwasher assets. The skate goals, score goals, and secret tapes are the same, and you find decks and stat points in both versions. The locations are different though. Stat points in this version are a lot different than the PS2. Instead of the game's logo, it's a glowing circle. So how does it feel to get all of these things? Well, not quite as smooth as it does on the PlayStation 2. Going from that game to this one was kind of jarring at first. It doesn't feel as smooth or fast, and as you can see, the draw distance is a lot lower on the PS1 than the PS2. Okay, since this version is built off Pro Skater 2's engine, I need to see something. Okay, you can revert. It would have been kind of blasphemous if there was no revert. But you can't revert well in a manual like on PS2. That's a little bit of a drawback. I should probably also say that I'm not super well versed with all the gameplay mechanics of the Pro Skater games. I love these games and I've played them a ton, but I'm not going to be able to seamlessly pull off combos. I want to say it took me about 40 minutes to get the 6 score for Cruise Ship on PS2. I kept messing up my combo line. That's all to say that I'm not going to be able to provide a super intricate analysis about the trick system's differences between both games. To me, and I think to most people, they're going to feel similar. I think that this game feels slower than the PS2 game, although I think I get more height out of ramps on the PS1 than I do on the PS2, but it's hard to say. So another thing that is different between both versions are the actual levels themselves. The list of levels are the same, and generally these levels are almost the exact same between both games, but there are differences. The PS1 levels are all more compact than their PS2 counterparts. They still feature what felt like the same amount of stuff to skate on, but it's not as sprawling as the levels on the PS2. Look at Rio though. Here is the secret area on PS2. Okay, it's a pool and a rail to grind. On the PS1 you grind on this balcony and end up in this cool back alley area. A lot more interesting than the PS2 and feels more sprawled out. But the PS1 levels are all more compact than their PS2 counterparts. Rio is an outlier. The soundtrack has been trimmed down, losing 8 songs, and some of the best songs in my opinion. I'd say the most representative song of this game is Ace of Spades, and that's still here. I'd say Shabba Games did a great job bringing the levels found in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the PS2 into the Pro Skater 2 engine so that it works for the PS1. Edge of Reality had a trickier job though. The N64 was already less powerful than the PS2, but on top of that, the game cartridges couldn't hold as much data as the CDs on the PS1. Like a tenth of the amount of data. So their job was a lot harder, and all things considered, this is the PS1 game of Pro Skater 3. But it feels a bit slower and tricking is way harder. I think that's because I can't plug the N64 controller into my PC. Why wouldn't Nintendo make this a USB-C connection? So the inputs are weird to say the least when you can't use the N64 controller. Also, the soundtrack has been massacred. The songs are compressed to hell and they've been shortened. But for some reason they didn't take like the first minute and a half of a song or something. They like remix certain songs. You should search up the N64 version of Ace of Spades. The decision they made for that song is interesting. Besides that, from my very short time with this version, I think it's pretty much the PS1 game trimmed down. Okay, so Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 was the next entry in the series, and it was also released on the PS1. The thing is about this game though was it didn't have the tried and true series formula of a 2-minute timer with various goals to complete in different compact stages. Pro Skater 4 introduced a more open approach to the Pro Skater formula, with these semi-open world maps packed with even more detail and NPCs in Pro Skater 3. And this time, there are even more goals, and they're given to you by NPCs all throughout the levels. I think Pro Skater 4 is generally highly liked, but I think the open-endedness of the levels is kind of divisive. On one hand, the open levels were a really cool addition, but on the other, it completely killed the fast-paced 2-minute formula that the other games had done so well. For a very long time, Pro Skater 4 was my favorite entry in the series. But that was also when the last time I played it was when I was a dumbass kid and I liked the open aspects and no time restrictions. I wasn't concerned with the objectives since I didn't really know how to beat them. I just liked the maps. After playing through Pro Skater 3 a few more times to familiarize myself with both versions and feeling like I actually know what I'm doing while playing, I fell in love with that game, and I think that it might be my favorite one over Pro Skater 4 now. But I still love Pro Skater 4. I have fun every time I play it, and just tricking around the levels is fun in itself. I never really play Free Skate too often on the other Pro Skater games, but Pro Skater 4 has me inadvertently playing Free Skate. But again, the PS1 doesn't have any NPCs, vehicles, or too many of the details found in Pro Skater 4, so how is it going to handle all this stuff? Well, imagine Pro Skater 3 on the PS1 is like an 80% copy of its PS2 counterpart. Pro Skater 4 is more like 40%. In my cross-gen ports video, I highlighted this game for being a pretty good cross-gen port, and I still hold that opinion. I think Pro Skater 4 for the PS1 is a really cool port, or demake even, but it's starting to get away from what the current gen versions of the games were looking like. We remember how Pro Skater 3 had the cool skate shop menu. Well, Pro Skater 4 has this menu that incorporates different parts of the levels. This half pipe back here with the floating money is actually the game's practice level. All of the other aspects of this menu are actual assets in a level. On the PS1 though, is any of this even possible? Nope. On the PS1 we have this menu. A screen that is reminiscent of the loading screens found in the game, and an instrumental loop of Public Enemy with the same options that were featured in Pro Skater 3. Well, that's fine. Let's make our skater. Okay, this is the same create a skater from Pro Skater 2 and 3 on the PS1, which is whatever I guess. I'm guessing all of the effort went into making the levels work on the PS1. So how did they look? Let's load up the first level college and see what we have. Okay, first let's show the PS2 version. This was the first Pro Skater game to change up the level formula. Players were no longer bound to a 2-minute timer and compact levels filled with collectibles and secret areas. Players could now explore bigger maps, much bigger than any other previous level. The only one that comes to my mind as being close in size to a Pro Skater 4 map is Canada in Pro Skater 3. That's just a guess as well, I don't know the actual closest map in size. But we're greeted by Atiba, who gives us a quick rundown on how the new system works. You got it, Atiba. Let's see what this map has to offer. Wow, this map is beautiful. I mean, I really like College as an introduction to Pro Skater 4. Such a nice looking level that does a great job at getting you into the game. The goals are all pretty simple, but I still find myself retrying the parade goal over and over again because I fell off the float. I mean, sketching cars, laying down on your board to do races? I'm sure these races are going to be a fun part of Pro Skater 4. Oh man, I almost forgot the PS1. How have you been doing? Alright, well with my skater created, let's drop into College and see what's going on. A horror game. Wow, not what I was expecting. So the draw distance being lower is already a thing that we experienced on Pro Skater 3. I think in this game it's a lot more jarring though because of the open level structure. It certainly doesn't look as good, but it's not unplayable. So again, no NPCs or things like vehicles and animals means a smaller variety of goals. Most of the goals in Pro Skater 4 on the PS1 involve you collecting skate letters, collecting combo letters, getting high scores, getting high combos, medaling in competitions, or performing specific tricks. On the PS2 you do a lot of these things, but you also compete in some races. Although this goal is a total piece of shit. You participate in a parade, kind of. You feed some hippos, you take a tour around Alcatraz, you do this stupid piece of shit race, you tag buses, you get chased by lions, you ride some carnival rides, a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that isn't necessarily skating, but it all involves you doing some skating. Okay, so all of these goals include a lot of cool presentation, but what you're doing in a lot of these goals is skating around. So when you compare these goals on PS2 to PS1, they're way cooler in presentation and stuff like that, but you're doing a lot of the same stuff. The presentation makes these goals so much better though. After so much time doing high score and skate letter goals in Silent Hill, it kind of gets old and lonely. On the PS2, look at this place. It's a freaking zoo. Look at Alcatraz. Spooky ghosts. Okay, but look at this goal where you collect keys outside the prison. The PS1, you are told by the orb to collect the keys in the small area. On PS2, you're asked by the guard in a panic to help him get his keys back. These creepy orbs around Silent Hill's Pro Skater are scaring me. They started off happy, but now they're mad. They don't like the way I've been talking about them. The level sizes are not quite as big as the levels on PS2. Here, I'm going to skate on these logs and head over there. All very cool. On PS1, I'm going to skate over here and... a wall? Okay, let's head into the parking garage. Oh man. Yeah, so these levels have been cut down obviously to make them fit in the memory limitations on the PS1, and I think that's fine for this version. These fairly simple and basic goals don't really need a huge map to experience them. Kona is set during the sunset or something. There's a cool purple sky, but way emptier feeling than the PS2 version. No ollie either. Alright, let's go over what content the PS1 game is missing, besides portions of the levels. First things first is Jango Fett. My favorite character to play as is not here. Okay, next is Zoo. I really like this level, but how would they have made a zoo level with no animals or people? They also removed the bonus levels Carnival and Chicago. But this game has two levels not seen in any other Pro Skater games, which are Sewers and Little Big World. In Sewers, you skate in, well, the sewers. It's a pretty basic level, but it's a cool little bonus. I usually like Sewers levels in video games. Okay, now Little Big World. Not Little Big Planet. But this level, Little Big World, is unlocked by completing the game 100%. So, Little Big World is this interesting level where you play as a miniature skater, skating around a kitchen. I also like levels like this. Reminds me of the house from Stuart Little 3 or Micro from Black Ops 3. Anyways, I've never played this level, so I can't really say how good it is to skate around. But there's Big Cheese here. Besides the removed levels, the only secret skater in this version of the game is the little person skater who goes with the Little Big World map. As you can see, he's a clown. Alright, so this game is pretty much Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 levels cut down to fit inside Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which is kind of the same thing they did with 3. 3 is a much better port though, because the game is still using that 2-minute style that the first two games used. Making the levels open and not having a timer really didn't translate as well to the PS1, not to mention the skating feels a lot smoother on the PS2 for both games. Coming to this version after playing the PS2 for a while feels a lot stiffer, but after playing for 20 minutes or so I get used to the older engine. I think the existence of these two versions of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 is a good thing. They allowed those who didn't yet have the PS2 to still experience the next steps in one of the biggest gaming franchises at the time. 3 is pretty cool, and the differences are interesting, but 4 is a lot weaker in comparison. Still, they're built off Pro Skater 2's engine, and you can never have a bad time on that game. That's all I've got to say today about this topic, but I love Pro Skater, so I'll always talk about these games. This series isn't done with ports yet. Anyways, that's all. Take care of yourselves and have a great day.